Okay, now we're good.
Awesome. And in addition to that, I wanted to have a couple of examples of real world programs that are kind of at the more entrepreneurial or government level to kind of just to talk about some of the successes and challenges that they've had implementing organics programs in the state so far. So this is really going to be kind of a basic level webinar, I guess. So some of you folks, Clinton, I see you. This is gonna be stuff that you already know, but really the whole purpose of this is to try to help folks that are thinking about stepping into the organics diversion game, whatever that looks like, from a government implementing program standpoint or from developing your own compost site. So I'm going to just jump in and start off with my presentation, which will be about the Colorado Organics Infrastructure Toolkit. Again, if you don't know me, I'm Jace Driver. I work with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I'm a waste diversion specialist in the Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division, and I am the compost lead for the state. So the origins of this toolkit are, if you don't know, we had a statewide organics management plan that we developed back in 2022, which was really just intended to give us an idea of where we were at in the state from an organics waste standpoint. I think up until then, we kind of had some assumptions about where we were from where the waste is being generated and where it was being managed, but this was really kind of a thorough accounting of the state of affairs for organics waste management at that time. From that, there was a few recommendations within that plan, and one of those recommendations, and a commonly recognized hurdle to increasing organics waste diversion, specifically food waste, was the permitting process. So we took that to heart and did a regulation change last year, finalized last year, where we kind of created a stepwise process for folks to go from a very small food waste compost facility to a larger food waste compost facility. Whereas before it was kind of a massive leap to go from small to very large. Now there's kind of a mid-tier step in there. And then in 2023, there was the Senate Bill 23-191, which mandated us to run another study as a follow-up to that first organics management plan. And this one was more of a deep dive into the benefits of composting and some more robust recommendations for moving forward with increasing waste diversion. And part of that was developing this toolkit. And before I get into the details of the toolkit, just a quick like why the focus on organics. Organics are by far the biggest slice of what we're throwing away out in our municipal solid waste stream. It's around 40% of the municipal solid waste that we dispose of in landfills around the state. It varies. And then the amount of organics waste that we're generating is about 2.5 million tons on an annual basis, and we're only currently diverting about 10% of that. And the other thing that I like to share that you guys probably all know, but unlike recycling, where it may have to go out of state to be processed and converted into new materials, organics is a very hyper-local process. It can be managed at the point of generation. I've got compost in my backyard right now. It's going to go back on the garden and grow my food. That food, if I don't need it, is going to go into that compost. So it's a locally circular process. Okay, let's get into the toolkit. So again, I want to frame this as like this is the basic steps to of some high-level guidance, some things to consider when you're looking at beginning an organics program. And it kind of covers all of these categories on a high-level basis. So collections and sorting, some Colorado-specific considerations, infrastructure, some organics policies that may be helpful for you to consider, funding that's available mostly through grants, the benefits of diversion, and ways that you can educate stakeholders. So let's jump right in. So if you're thinking about starting up an organics diversion program, the first thing you're probably going to be thinking about is collections and sorting. And how are you going to be doing that? The very first step I think you need to be thinking about is what is your collection methodology going to be? And the toolkit kind of evaluates all of these different collection modes and their effectiveness for the source of generation, be that residential or commercial, what the materials are. So this whole toolkit looks at just food waste and yard waste, which are the primary sources of MSW organics in the state. And then also evaluates like population density and how effective the methodology is there. I won't go into the details on this stuff, but just know that everything that I'm going to show a brief presentation of, like this is going to be a whiplash presentation of what this toolkit is. It's in way more detail in the actual toolkit itself. And then if you want to deep dive further into the information in the toolkit, all of that stuff is delved into more deeply in the organics management plan, both of which I'll link to at the end of this. And I'll share, actually, Ali already shared a link to the toolkit and the plan in the intro. But if you need that, you can always reach out to me as well. Or sorry, in the invite. Another thing that you need to think about with that pairs with what your collection program is going to be is what type of vehicles that you're going to use. Obviously, this may be limited based on how you're going to grow and start your business, or if you're contracting, um, if you're going to be the government entity running your own hauling. A lot of things to consider. And there's again, it's just a kind of a high level, what things are effective, what things may you consider for what type of materials that you're thinking about managing and where they're coming from. Other things that you need to think about when you're developing a collection program is reducing contamination. I think Clinton would tell you uh, loudly that you need to reduce the contamination at the point of generation, right? It's much easier to remove it. It's much easier to not have to remove it than to have to remove it, right? There's a lot of things that you can do at that level that you are probably going to want to bake into your potential contract. So if you're going to do the hauling yourself, these are things that you need to think about as programmatic standards for you to implement. If not, there are things that you're going to want to think about baking into your hauling contract if you're going to contract that out. If you're not going to contract it out, if you're going to have like an open market, it may be something that you want to ordinance in as a requirement. Just know that the easiest and best way to eliminate contamination is going to be upfront. And I think one of the interesting things to point out on this is the municipal buyback component. Um, the concept with the municipal buyback as a contamination reducer is that if you have the folks that are generating the materials that are going into your compost, getting that material back, that hands-on, tactile, visual sensation of seeing, hey, this is the material that I helped make, it gives them that more real-world application of wanting to keep it clean and understanding why it's important to keep it clean. Here's just there's some more information in there on sortation methodologies for dealing with contamination, but as you can see in the triangle on the left, which I believe is from um, the International Solid Waste Association, is to prevent contamination before you get in there. You can see then there's different stages at which you would remove contamination. All of these different methodologies have different um, times at which they're more useful. They have different materials at which they sort out. So there's a lot of considerations to dealing with contamination if you do need to do it in process. Okay, so moving into the next section, Colorado, we have some unique issues in the state. Probably the biggest issue that we commonly see is that we have a lot of woody waste in various areas, generally the mountain areas of the state. And you may have an abundance of wood waste that you need to deal with. And the toolkit outlines a few methodologies for managing those. These are the three primary ones that they talk about, and they talk about some of the things that you need to consider in managing wood waste in these ways. For mulching, it's really thinking about what are you trying to make? Are you making a mulch product? Are you making mulch for compost? Are you mulching for simple land application? What's the product that you're going to make? That'll determine what's the equipment that you're going to need. Uh, that kind of determines what your market is for that. You'll need to know that before. You don't want to spend a lot of money to make a bunch of mulch that nobody wants to buy from you. So you need to understand your market before you get into that. You also need to have a space to store it, and you need to think about how you're going to store it. Um, Wood and mulch in general is kind of notorious for catching on fire, and it's happened many times in the state. So you need to think about your ability to manage that stuff. And even if you can make a nice high quality product, you need to be able to understand that you may have to transport it to market too, or whatever its final destination is. So consider all of that when getting into mulching. Compost, near and dear to all of our hearts, I think. Just know there's a whole lot of considerations. I'll get into some of the permitting stuff on composting in a second, but um, with wood waste management for compost, you'll really need to figure out what your other sources of materials are. It's a high carbon source. It doesn't compost all that well on its own, especially. You need a lot of nitrogen and moisture to make it go. So, what are your other feedstocks going to be? Is it going to become to you ground? Or are you going to have to grind it yourself or shred it yourself? Um, what kind of equipment are you going to use in your compost process? What's your finished product, etc. And then biochar is kind of the new kid on the block. I will say there's a lot of considerations if you do want to start a biochar program. Depending on the size and the technology that you use, there may be air permitting requirements. I will say that not all biochar is created equal. So depending on the technology that you're going to use will certainly depend on the product that you're going to get out of it, but it may also determine what your market is for it. And it may determine what your permitting is for it as well. So just something to consider. But those are the three main ways of managing woody waste in the state per the toolkit, and it really kind of spells out the best management practices for all of these different strategies. And then it also goes into some just a quick discussion of management practices for some of our tourist-driven areas like ski resorts, parks, and large events. I won't go into detail on those, just know that they are contained within the toolkit. All right. So the next stage in the process here is obviously how you're going to process this stuff. This section of the toolkit is primarily focused on composting. So it just discusses the compost rules and regulations, what classifications of facilities fit, what the requirements are for that. But when they all say, before you get to that stage of thinking about developing a facility, look at what facilities already exist in your area. Every square on this map here is a landfill. Obviously, we have landfills area everywhere. We don't have compost facilities everywhere, but every circle on here is a compost facility. And you can see around the population center, up and down the Front Range, the I-70 corridor, and quite a bit on the western slope as well. We have access to compost facilities. If there's an opportunity for you to partner or develop your program in coordination with an existing facility, that's going to save you a lot of time and hassle of trying to create your own facility. However, if you do not have that facility nearby, we can get you to a permitted state. So there's a quick little bit of guidance on what facility classifications mean, what the permitting process is in here. I will say after you have read that in the toolkit, and if you have questions or are interested in moving forward, all you need to do is reach out to me, and I will go through the requirements for permitting a facility for you, and will maybe be the one doing the permitting of that facility for you. And if anybody didn't know, that is A1 Organics, our very largest compost facility and one of the largest compost facilities in the whole entire country. Okay, another thing that may not be something you have control over, but maybe something that you want to push in your area, or if you are a local government, is something to consider is organics policies that may help work in conjunction with the development of organics diversion programs in your area. I won't go through these, but just know it's sorted out by the material type, where they can be implemented at the state or local level, and what the intended impacts are for them. It does show too which ones of these have been adopted in places in Colorado. So if you have questions about any of these, I think we can tie you to other resources within the state that maybe have implemented some of these programs if you have questions about how they may work in your area. So next up, everybody's favoriteest topic in the whole world is money. How do we pay for all of these programs, all of this infrastructure? So we do have a newish grant program in the state. It's a combination of our two previous recycling grants. That's the Colorado Circular Communities Grant. It is an ongoing rolling grant fund targeted at waste diversion projects. It is statewide. There is no scheduling anymore like there was with the old RREO and forward grants. And it is very robust. It should be 15 plus $1 million each year available for grants in the waste diversion sector. And I will say, now that we have the extended producer responsibility program going into effect in the next year, that will cover the cost of recycling paper and plastic packaging. Um, the the grants, I think, will sort of shift over time into covering more things that are not traditional recyclables, which will be, in my opinion, organics and probably industrial materials. So I think a big component of that should be going towards organics diversion throughout the state. So if you're thinking about an organics diversion program, please reach out to the C3 Grant Fund team, and they will help guide you on how best to apply for the available monies there. There are also federal grants. I will say who knows what the consistency of those will be going forward or the availability of them, but they do exist, and we have had folks in the state take advantage of them. And then with the state grants, there is often it's typically a reimbursement program, and I know that can be tough for folks to put up the initial funds. Um, the Office of Economic Development does have some resources and funds available to help with startup costs and offsetting loan costs as well. So worth looking into them. And all this stuff is provided in quite a bit greater detail in the toolkit with links to all of these programs and ways to apply. And then one other thing, this is less true now with the C3 as opposed to how RREO and Forward were, but there's a lot of considerations with grants. They can be complicated, they can be onerous and taxing. Um, there are resources available to help apply for grants, especially within the C3 grant. There is the STEPS program for local government. If you are a local government entity, they will help guide you through applying for the grants process. We know it can be a big staff burden to try to apply for and manage grants, and definitely encourage folks to use that in assisting with the grant application process. Another thing that the toolkit goes into is the benefits of diversion. I think it's important when you're trying to create a program, not only for stakeholders in your community, but maybe if you're at the government level, the decision makers in your government, to promote the benefits of diversion of organics, not just from a saving landfill airspace standpoint, although that may be something that's important as well. There is a calculator for landfill airspace savings in the toolkit. There's also a greenhouse gas equation that you can use to promote avoided emissions that you may save by diverting materials. There's a water savings calculator if you want to say if we apply, X amount of organics in this area, we may be saving, this much water in our region. So I encourage you to, when you're creating a program, if you need to get it off the ground, it can be helpful to promote the benefits that exist of organics diversion. And then for ongoing messaging, I think it's important to continue to promote the whys of why we need to divert organics, which ties into your education programs, education outreach that are going to tie into this. So quite a few good uh, practices and rules and um, plans to follow or plan recommendations to follow in this section. Um, the first and foremost, and there's quite a few resources in the toolkit that are linked to this, um, is around preventing of waste. I think we all know that waste prevention rules over waste diversion. Um, and there are quite a few resources in here to help promote the concepts of waste prevention as well as waste diversion through EPA, NRDC, and the USDA. So definitely would encourage you to use those resources when developing your education programs. And then with any collection program, you need to have a kind of robust and a consistent communication plan within that. Um, so, I think we all know that not all of us receive information in the same way. And this portion of the guidance really runs you through figuring out who you're targeting with your communications, how you want to time it, what are the tools, how you can work with the haulers to help generate those messages. Haulers will often have their own communication systems in place. Do those work with what your messaging goals are going to be? And then also provides a whole bunch of best practices that are kind of work broadly across whatever your program is, like using multiple methods for reaching out. Like I said, some of us do things in a technological way and some of us don't, right? So sometimes paper mailers work, sometimes Facebook works. Um, sometimes a QR code is the easiest way to go. So using a variety of ways to reach out, staying consistency in that message, keeping it simple, um, and color coding, I think we've all realized helps a lot too. So having consistent color coding, I think throughout your program is a big help. A whole lot of other things to consider. Best management practices for dealing with the various sources of the waste streams. Again, incentivizing why we need to keep it clean. So getting the contamination out in the beginning. Again, I think that is an education and outreach component as well as a methodology component. Um, Using what you know about your local area to help keep things clean and to help promote composting, I think is huge too, right? If are you in an area where public lands are important, then that's the message that you want to hit for this. Are you in an area where water conservation is important? Then I think that's the message you want to hit. So appealing to what the sentiment of your locality is. Um, Incentivizing the local use of compost in your program, again, that just ties back to like this is the product you help create, right? If you can get people's hands on the stuff that they're helping to generate, um, that'll go a long way towards helping people see, the reasoning behind what you're doing and get them excited into what you're doing too. And then, are you going to take compostable products? If you do, I would encourage you very strongly to consider what that messaging is going to be and clarify what's acceptable in your program. And then the last thing in here is a big old resource library that has a whole bunch of links to all kinds of cool resources. There's calculators, there's guidance, documents, fact sheets, everything and anything you could think of, from Biocycle to EPA to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. So a cool tool library, I would say, to help you with developing your program. And that is it. If you want to find out more, um, the organics management plan and the toolkit, as well as the first organics management plan, are hosted on our site. You can find it through that QR code. Like I said, Ali shared it in the invite, and I will take any questions if there are any. Chandra?
I was just clapping for you.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Cool. I think this will make it really nice then that we can move into some actual cool and interesting presentations about people that are doing actual programmatic implementation.
Jace, Clinton, and
Yeah.
Ian both have their hands up.
Oh,
He's vigorously waving his hands, actually.
I can't
Great.
see anything, so go ahead.
Oh, great. Great job, Jace. Thank you for
Thanks.
such an awesome presentation. One quick question I had, and yeah, I think the answer to this question is going to be yes, but with the EPR coming to light here soon and the educational program that's going to be generated around certified compostables, are you guys looking at partnering with that conversation so that when you're talking about bin color, you're talking about certified compostables, you're talking about which to use, what not to use, also in conjunction with the truth in labeling law. It's just going to be really important to make sure that all that education stays in line. So I just want to make sure that you guys are thinking about that within this toolkit or updating the toolkit if that's necessary.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that'll be CAA's, I guess, product to generate. So we'll have to see what they want to do, and I'm sure be able to have some input on that. I think our Compostable Labeling Act is pretty straightforward on what it needs and requires. But yeah, I think if we see a need to update the toolkit down the road, or maybe provide an addendum to it, to help with that outreach component, we certainly will. Oh, and before I hand it over to Julie, one thing I just want to throw out there for all of you experts that do already know all of this stuff, please share this toolkit and the organics management plan with folks that you know that are thinking about developing programs. Yeah, or you can send them my way and I will share it with them as well. But we want to try to get this resource in the hands of folks that are beginning out with their program implementation. That was essentially the whole point for this toolkit, was to help with that. It's a big burden to try to get an organics diversion program off the ground, especially when you're starting from square one. There's a lot of considerations, and the intention of this toolkit was to help kind of alleviate that burden and point folks to develop resources that already exist.
And I think Brian has a couple of questions. He has his hand up.
Go ahead, Brian.
Hey, Jace, good to see you. Sorry, I dropped like 3 or 4 questions in the chat. I'm actually switching Zooms in a moment to a fund meeting. But my real top of the line question is, like, how long is it going to take us to get this, not as a suggestion for localized process, but where it's a mandate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we as a state are going to be promoting any or producing any policy recommendations, but the Organics Management Plan has a load of policy recommendations that are embedded within it, from waste diversion requirements for large generators, as well as a yard waste ban, to some more, I don't know, boutique policy things like share tables and things like that. So I would encourage folks to look through those. If they're intriguing to you, I would certainly talk with your legislators about how you can implement those policies. Most of them are going to require legislative lift, and are not things that we can directly implement as the department.
That is the answer that every section of CDPHE has said. And as we're going through this whole landfill methane rulemaking process, like, all the parties are asking for diversion regulations. So I just look forward to promoting that conversation. I also recently learned about the soil technology, which I haven't really had a lot of time to dive into yet. I'm wondering if the state has any official stance on that.
No, if it fits into our compost regulatory structure, which is pretty flexible on how it regulates organics, material processing, and the products that are developed from those, we're not going to have a preference for one over the other. We just want to make sure things are done in a safe manner. So protecting human health and the environment.
All right. I look forward to watching the rest of the sun recording. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks, Brian. All right, there are no more questions. Let's kick it over to Julie.
Great, thanks. Let me get my screen share going here. Can you all see that okay? Sweet. Awesome. Well, nice to see you all. My name is Julie Mach. I'm the owner of Elements Mountain Compost down in Salida. And I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about kind of our journey working through just developing a compost hauling and processing business out in rural Colorado. We started as a super small program. This was back in the day. This photo's from back in the day when I was moving material with a wheelbarrow and turning piles mostly by hand. So we've gone from a very grassroots kind of backyard phase of trying to divert food waste to a fully operational Class 1 commercial facility. So we'll kind of talk through that progression. Like I said, we started super simply with one Ford Ranger and a utility trailer. We were moving bins by hand, using like a super old 1975 Bobcat to turn piles initially, and operating on about a third of an acre as a CESQ, or conditionally exempt small quantity composting facility. So we were registered with the state. Jace came out and did a site visit at that original facility a number of years ago. And again, super small quantities that we were processing at that time. But we were doing commercial collections. We were working with a handful of mostly restaurants and one hospital to collect primarily back of house food waste at that time. So just things like vegetable scraps, no meat or dairy, trying to keep it as kind of simple and clean as we could. And it was great. We were making a quality compost product and selling it at the farmer's market, and not making a lot of money, but we were composting. So we've kind of progressed a little bit since then, and a lot of that was due to capacity limitations. So we were operating as a CESQ, which was previously limited to just 5 cubic yards of food waste in process at any one time. And if you can envision, a cubic yard is about the size of the back of a pickup truck. We were getting close to maxing that out pretty quickly. We actually opened a second CESQ facility to kind of get around that and double our capacity. But it takes a lot to manage multiple facilities. You need equipment in multiple places, and it was kind of a logistical pain in the butt. But at that time, there was, as Jace had mentioned, kind of the only next step for a food waste processor was to jump to what was called a Class 3 facility. Still is called a Class 3 facility. Big permitting hurdles, lots of engineering and design costs, and construction costs that we just, as a small business, like had no potential to get to that level. And, we were looking at a capacity gap, right? That we're operating in Chaffee County, Salida and Buena Vista area, and about 34% of what's going into our county landfill is food waste and yard waste. So that's 9,000 tons of material a year, and we were processing a couple hundred tons, if that. So a huge just gap in the ability to process these materials locally and turn them into a useful product. So when you have that capacity limitation, capacity gap, one thing that you can do is just change the rules. And that's what we did. We worked really closely with Jace, obviously, and other folks at the Colorado Composting Council to adjust the regulations that increased the CESQ limit to 20 cubic yards of type 2 waste or food waste in process at any one time. And then what it really did that helped us the most was expand that Class 1 permit type so that we can now have food waste processing facilities up to 5,000 cubic yards under that Class 1 permit. And that the difference between Class 1 and Class 3 is quite significant as far as kind of the bureaucratic hurdles that you have to jump through, and the complexity of engineering and construction required for those facilities. So like Jay said, it created that stepping stone for small and mid-sized facilities between CESQ and Class 3. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the development of our site. We're between Salida and Poncha Springs, if y'all are familiar with that area. We did some work around kind of site selection, surveying and engineering. All of that probably took close to a year just to kind of work through the engineering process and site planning process. And you can see just a quick visual of our plan outline there at the top. But the main thing we needed to do for that Class 1 permit was stormwater controls. So we ended up building basically a perimeter road around our site to act as a berm and control storm water, whether it was offsite or onsite, and be able to direct it towards a retention pond, which you see one of my employees spreading compost in that retention pond after we build it down there on the left. The other thing we put together was a compost operations plan, which is not overly complicated. If you follow the regulations carefully, it kind of lines out exactly what you need in that plan. But it does take, again, quite a bit of time on the front end to put some of those documents and things together. This is a picture of our site, pretty like close to the end of the construction phase. Again, you can see the road at the bottom. That green area is the retention pond that we reseeded and vegetated. And then you can see the piles kind of operating in the background. Everything is graded and slopes towards that pond. So again, we're dealing with the stormwater control was the main impetus for that construction piece. We also put in a building, electric and a well, just so we can have, utilities and things on the site as needed. Equipment's a big component as well. Like I said, we were operating that 1975 skid steer. We upgraded about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years, to this electric skid steer, which has been great for our operations. It's small, it's super nimble. We will outgrow it at some point and need a bigger front end loader. But it's been awesome for kind of this small mid-size operation that we're running. We've got a trommel sifter you can see on the right. That's for sifting finished compost. These are, again, really popular in kind of the small and mid-sized composters. They're relatively affordable and have been great. And then, of course, the other thing you need is collection equipment. We run, a truck with a dump bed on it, and then we've got roll-off trailers for events and various collection bins for other activities. It's a picture of our truck there up on the right-hand side. So we just modified a 350 dump bed truck and put a lifter on it so we can service our commercial clients, again, restaurants, grocery stores. We have a residential program as well. We're just starting a curbside program in Salida, and then we've been doing a residential drop-off program throughout Chaffee County for a number of years. The drop-off program has worked really well. We just find some customers want that convenience of the curbside pickup. Like I said, we also do events, weddings, music festivals, things like that. Again, we are, through this Class 1 permit, allowed to take in food waste, yard waste, and wood waste. And then we also accept BPI certified compostable products, so the cups and plates and things you see at events. We are not permitted to take any animal manure or any human waste or biosolids. So we're limited in that those feedstocks that we can accept, but it's been, it works great to have the food waste and primarily wood waste for the composting that we're doing. We're using a pretty simple turned windrow composting process. There are other small composters who are doing work with aerated static piles or passive kind of aerated static piles. And, I think there's, depending on your site location and size and capacity, lots of different sort of options to maximize your throughput based on your processing type. Obviously, we're doing temperature tracking. We're using a RioTemp automated tracking system now. So we get, more than daily, we're getting, every 15-minute temperature readings on our piles, which helps us kind of track and make sure that they are going through the appropriate heating up and cooling down process before we finish processing that compost. It's a quick picture of our sifter. So you can see all of the material running through. The fines drop out the bottom there on the right, and then the overs dump out the end. So we end up with this is a 1/2 inch sifted compost. And we do sell our compost back to the community. We do some testing, of course, before we do that to kind of align with CDPHE requirements and also to know, the quality of our compost from a growing and soil health standpoint. We sell mostly in bulk. We do the majority of our sales in bulk. Folks come in with pickup trucks to pick up a couple yards, landscapers, and then we deliver as well. We do a little bit of bagging. We don't have a bagger at this point, so it's fairly limited. And then we do a lot of education and outreach. We're the only composter in Central Colorado, so a big part of our job is to educate people about the value, both of actually diverting their organic waste, and then also purchasing and applying finished compost. So we work with school groups, we work with local environmental groups, we're at the farmers market and other community events, trying to get the word out and helping people understand why they should compost with us. And that's it for me. Hopefully I didn't go too far over time, but happy to take a couple of questions if there are any.
Actually, I have a question. Can you get a compost bagger through some kind of grant process to help with that?
Yeah, it's certainly an option. We got a big grant through the RREO program for our facility construction, and we're actually just closing that out. So we really haven't been eligible for another grant. But yeah, I think one of our next steps will be looking at a bagging machine before next spring, as well as some additional trucks and hauling equipment. But yeah, those are great options for the C3 grant now. Yep. MJ?
Hey, Julie.
Hey.
Thanks for the presentation. This was great to see how the actual changes in practice between the two, like CESQ and how that helped you. I am wondering if you have any advice for me as a city and others for how we can support something like this happening within our jurisdiction. So how could like a city be a good partner?
So we've partnered both with Chaffee County and the city of Salida, as well as actually the town of Crested Butte, on a couple of different projects and focusing mostly on residential collection, but also some commercial. And I'd say the two biggest things that are helpful as a small composter are money, if you have it, but also marketing and outreach, right? You probably have a fairly large reach as far as your communications go, and that can be a huge constraint for smaller composters just because it takes time, right? And funding sometimes, right? Paid advertising, whether it's print or radio, can be costly. So if there's a way to help support that and help run an outreach and education campaign, I can see that being a huge benefit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Julie, Liz Chapman, thank you so much for the informative presentation. Could you speak a little bit about why your operation is continuing to accept compostable packaging?
Yeah. So we've accepted compostable packaging for a number of years, probably 7 maybe, since kind of once we got past the being super small backyard scale, we started accepting those materials, and we sort of did a little bit of testing on our own to see how they would break down, and found for the most part that we do have a pretty good rate of disintegration and breakdown in our piles. What I think we've heard a lot from other composters is they do sometimes collecting those compostables from certain events or things can increase the amount of contamination kind of associated with that collection event. But we've been able to work really closely with either event coordinators or having our staff on site to do sorting of compostables, that we can manage that contamination. Now, part of that is because we're somewhat small. So we're, just the volume wise, we can deal with the additional contamination if we see that. But we've actually done a little bit of testing back and forth. We just worked through a test with Eunomia on collection of compostables, and in comparing the contamination in kind of these control piles with no outside compostables coming in and contamination in our other piles, we didn't actually see a huge difference. So, and the other kind of thing that we saw is, again, the good breakdown of the compostable products if you have enough food waste and moisture to keep them kind of mixed into the pile. So I think, again, because we're small, we've been able to be a little bit nimble in managing those materials pretty intentionally, and so that's helped us kind of overcome some of the challenges. Yeah. Robbie?
Hey, Julie, thanks for the presentation. Awesome that you're using an electric skid steer. Very curious, just like, is there any challenges with that? Or just like maintenance wise, is that a great option? And would you
Yeah,
encourage it to other folks?
it's been a cool journey. Overall, definitely recommend. Like, again, for a small to mid-sized operation, we get 6 to 8 hours of runtime out of that machine on a full charge. So it's, more than enough for a day's worth of work for the most part. Get a little bit less, 5 to 6 hours in the winter. So we do see a drop off in those colder temps. But for the most part, the machine's been great. We have run into 1 or 2 maintenance issues of just parts wearing out a little bit faster than my mechanic might have expected. His thought is these are new machines, right? We have probably one of maybe a handful in Colorado, and maybe a couple dozen in the country. So they're new, and the companies are figuring out how to build them better, essentially. So I would say by the time you get to the 3rd, 4th, 5th generation, they're probably going to be a lot better. But I would say overall, it ties into kind of our overall mission of reducing emissions. They're super quiet, which is so nice, just for operating. And overall, we've been really happy with it. Happy to talk more offline about it too. And before I take any more questions, I just let me stop sharing here, and then I want to check time so that I don't go over too much here. Allie or Jace, how are we doing on time?
I think we're okay.
Okay, for a couple more.
Yeah.
Jamie?
Hey, great
Hey, Jamie.
So I'm thinking I'm going to be starting hauling in August, and I was considering doing drop sites. And something I've heard from others in the industry is that it's really hard to pinpoint like who's doing the contamination and like how do you educate like prior to that, or like how do you hold people accountable? Like I want to make sure that I'm not screwing up my processor. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think front loading as much education as you can is key. All of our drop sites have been for residents only, not for any commercial folks. And they, people have to pay for it. Not very much, but they do pay. And so I think there's a level of buy-in there. I think if it was a free drop site, you might encounter more contamination. But when people are paying for the service, they have a lock code to get into the site. We've got signage up around the drop-off location. We also, we have an email newsletter. We're kind of communicating with those customers as frequently as possible, and giving them tips on, what they can compost, what kind of contamination we're seeing if we do see it, that sort of thing. We don't have cameras or anything like that to kind of pinpoint who we get contamination from. But I would say overall, it's really pretty low at all of our drop sites. Folks have been pretty compliant. And Max.
Hey, Julie, congratulations on the new facility. I wanted to ask what the timeline was from kind of the start of this goal and objective to achieving your fully operational and licensed Class 1.
Question. I mean, Jason and I have been talking about this for probably 5 years. And just like saying, like, we got to get to this place where we can have a mid-tier permitting facility. So that was part of it. I would say, we got our grant in 2023, I would say. So right about 2 years ago. Um, and it took a good 6 to 8 months for kind of the engineering process to kind of go through. Part of that was because the regulation change was happening at the same time. So we were originally sort of engineering towards a class 3 standard, and then we had to sort of pivot for the new class 1 standard. So there was a little bit of delay in that, but I would, budget as much time as you can for that kind of process. The construction was actually fairly quick. We did a lot of the dirt moving ourselves, but I would say we probably started construction in April of 24, and we're mostly wrapped up by July or August with the actual like stormwater construction component. So that part was fairly quick. All the other buildings and all that stuff have come just as funding and things have been available and time to do all that planning. So I would say about 2 years total for us, but you could tighten up that timeline if you were aggressive and had lots of money.
Hey, thanks.
Awesome. Well, sweet. Thank you all for your time, and I'll pass it over to Liz.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie, and congrats on hitting the 10-year mark on your facility. That's awesome. Let me share here. All right. Thanks, Julie and Jace. So I'll kind of go through, I'll kind of hit the same topics as Julie and Jace both just kind of hit. But I'll go through it more from a municipal lens, and kind of some specifics of what we're doing here. So my name is Liz Mauro. My email's there on the slide. I am the manager of the South Canyon Landfill, which is in Glenwood Springs. So we are a landfill. We also do recycling. We do aggregate recycling. We have a commercial composting facility. There's been composting going on our site in some form for about 40 years, which is kind of incredible, but it's gone through many changes and adaptations over those years. So we'll kind of talk about some of that and some new stuff we've done and kind of how we're trying to work with the goals and the strategies in the organics management plan and toolkit. But yeah, so basically we are a class 3 facility. We are owned and operated by the city, so we're fully municipal. Let's see. There we go. All right. So as Jace already kind of hit, the first thing you're going to want to think about is how are you moving your organics? Are you hauling? Are you hiring a contractor? Are you doing drop off? Are you doing curbside? And kind of it could be overwhelming to try to do all of these all at once. So I guess for someone who was newly getting into composting from a municipal standpoint, I'd recommend kind of looking at all your options and maybe picking one or two and seeing what's doable for you to try out. Obviously, curbside can be a big lift, especially if you don't already have a hauler in your area or if you're not already doing trash and recycling. So sometimes, like Julie was just talking about, drop-off sites can be a good entry point, in my opinion, for small posters or smaller municipalities. So, like for example, in our composting facility, first of all, just real simple, residents could bring their food waste to the compost site themselves anytime they want, anytime we're open, which is 5 days a week. Now, I will say, even though that's been the case for years, hardly anybody does that. They just don't do it. So we do also have a staffed public drop-off site for food waste that's in town at our recycle center. That gets a lot of use. We also do special events, which I mean, I don't know if you would call it special events, but we do every other Saturday, we do a brush drop for residents that's free in town. And then we pay a contractor actually to put it in a roll-off and haul it to us. So that's kind of how we handle yard waste. And that's been pretty helpful for people who live in town who want to compost their yard waste but don't want to drive to the landfill. That was really the reason we did that. And so one of the things to keep in mind that's special kind of about our municipality is less than a year ago, our city council passed a landfill yard waste ban. So essentially what that means is we're not allowing anyone to put yard waste in our landfill anymore. And we're still on the road to enforcing that, but we are rejecting, I'd say, 1 or 2 loads a week. In order to reach that compliance. And it is working. Like we are seeing way more people sort their loads. We allow them to sort on site. We give them time to do it, and the vast majority of people are doing it, which is great. So we're getting a lot more yard waste. Obviously, that doesn't really help the food waste. That's a whole other thing, which could maybe be a future step. But so essentially, we are trying to do an all of the above approach for diversion to make it as many options for people as possible. And so part of that is having drop sites, having weekend brush drops, having multiple drop sites, multiple options. And then there also is a local private company that does curbside pickup too. So people have so many options. So I'd recommend just looking at everything. Can a drop-off site work? If having a permanent drop-off site is overwhelming to you, what if you could do it 1 day a week? What if you could do it 1 day a month? What if you could do it just weekends? I would look at those creative options to limit the time and like labor cost of that. So your next question is going to be, what can you divert? If you're running your own site, obviously you have a lot more control over that, and you can kind of get into creative materials if you want to, depending on your permit. If you're working with an existing site, I mean, it's just a key thing to just talk to them directly, find out what they can take, ask them questions about it, ask them which materials it's okay to bring mixed together, which materials have to be separate. Just make sure you're really clear on that, and make sure if you're writing a contract for a hauler that it's really clear what they're bringing. So as a class 3 facility, we take pretty much everything. And I will say, even though we take pretty much everything, food waste is still a pretty small percentage of what we're getting, just because of voluntarily, we're not getting a lot of uptake on people wanting to do that. I'd say it's 10 to 20% of our population composting at this point. So if you're just getting into it, food waste might not be the easiest. The easiest might be something like grass clippings or manure, if you have a place that can do manure, or industrial sources. So I would look around your community and just think about, like, are there any unique places creating a lot of food waste? So, for example, around here, there's certain distilleries and breweries that create a lot of organic waste. And we can, as a class 3 facility, we can take that and we can compost it. And so that can be a good way to kind of get a good amount of organics to kind of get started. Obviously, the first thing you're going to want to do is talk to those people and find out what they're doing with their waste now. Some of them may be already feeding it to animals or composting it or something. So, and what you see here is a picture of food waste that we get. So our loads are pretty clean that we get from our local hauler, which is awesome. And we do take compostable packaging as well. So kind of a little example here from our facility of how looking at unusual feedstocks or less common feedstocks can be a benefit. So, like, one of my favorite kind of sayings that the permaculture people always say is that the problem is the solution. So an example of that would be like, on our site, on our composting site, we have no access to water. So we're co-located with a landfill. We have no clean water to use, period. So that means we have to find a way to make compost with no water in Colorado, which is hard. So the way that we've been able to do that is by finding out a good way in our operation to be able to accept liquid wastes that are high in nitrogen. So, key example, restaurant grease trap waste. So, when restaurant grease traps get pumped out, if you've ever worked in a restaurant, you know it's nasty, but there's a lot of good nutrients in there and it's a lot of water. So, by figuring out a creative way to be able to process that waste, and because we have that class 3 permit and all those controls, we're able to do that. And we're able to accept a waste that's 95% water, put it into our process, and that gives us all the moisture we need to compost everything else that we're getting that's drier. So that really solves a big problem right there, and it makes our system work. And it's kind of the combination of factors of we don't have water and we need it, and there's very few places on the western slope to dispose of restaurant grease trap waste. So other kind of creative, unusual feedstocks you could look into, if you either have the class 3 permit or there's a class 3 facility driving distance to your municipality would be fryer grease, restaurant grease trap, used grains, and also porta potty and pit toilets. So you need the class 3 permit for those, but if you have that permit and you can process those, they're a good source of your nutrients for your compost. And they're kind of another one of those niche wastes that we really would rather turn into a compost product than be landfilling. So, how you know whether you can compost these, really you have to be familiar with your permit or be familiar with, the rules and regulations of the site that you're bringing it to, and then figure out how you're going to work within those rules. And then finally, just wanted to talk a little bit about end markets. So selling your compost to the customers. So we sell about 4,000 tons of compost a year in Glenwood, and we do one free giveaway in the spring, and that's only about 10 tons. So I will say among composters, I know there's a lot of debate about if our giveaway is good or bad. Right? I think if they're targeted for a specific reason, they can be useful. So those reasons would be, is composting brand new in your area and people just don't know what it is? Or are you overcoming bad experiences? And we had a little bit of that of like, 10, 20 years ago, there were some instances of people on our site making some compost that was not great. And it was not STA certified yet, and there was different things going into it that maybe shouldn't have been. And so over the past 10 years, we've had to overcome some of that negative rumors and things in the community. And the way we've done that is by doing this, I call it our free sample every spring and giving away 10 tons. And then people see like, oh, okay, it's not scary, and it's actually become a very popular thing. And then we've gotten tons more sales because of that. So that has helped. On the other hand, I would say like, don't become reliant on that to offload your compost because we want to be treating it as the valuable product that it is. And if we treat it that way, most people will buy it. And it's still for what it is a very good deal. Especially so we do all of our sales bulk. And like when you do the cost comparison of buying ours bulked or buying, the stuff that's sold at Lowe's in bags, it comes out like an amazing bargain, right? So we sell ours, for example, for $40 per ton. I would recommend looking into soil blends if you can. So like Julie said, she sells topsoil too. We sell topsoil, we sell a mix, we sell compost straight. So we have multiple products so people can kind of get what they want. And then working with, if you're a municipality and you want to look into composting, a good place to start is looking within your municipality in what departments are doing landscaping and could be using compost. Even if you're not producing it yet, what compost facility nearby could they be buying it from? And find out, like, talk to your parks department and find out where they're getting topsoil and compost now. And are they buying those expensive bags from Lowe's? And could they be buying it bulk somewhere else? So it's all stuff to look into and try and complete that circle, which sometimes just comes down to, a composter letting people know that they have something available. So that's really all I have. I mean, just if anyone has questions specifically about how starting a composting program could work in a municipality, go for it, and we can do questions for everybody now too. So here, I'll stop sharing.
Hi, Liz. It's Liz.
Hi, Liz.
Thanks so much. Can you speak a little bit about how you do quality control of the finished product when you're taking in some feedstocks that some people might find threaten the quality of the end product?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I would just say that as a class 3 facility, people should realize, or I mean, if they don't realize, I will tell them, that we are a really highly regulated facility, and everything we do down to the exact process that we use is written in our permit and approved by CDPHE to their specific requirements. So we are following their time and temperature requirements, making sure we get that pathogen reduction by recording our temperatures and recording what we do in our process. But then on top of that, we are testing every batch that we produce. Um, and so we are, as an STA participant, so we're a member of the U.S. Composting Council, and we do the STA certification program, which actually means that we're going above and beyond what's required by the state for testing. We're doing more testing for many constituents. And what we've done to really increase transparency and kind of allay those fears about certain inputs is we actually take our quarterly STA test results and we just post them as a PDF directly on our website. So if you go to cogs.us/landfill, that's our landfill webpage, and right at the top is our lab report from our compost with all the results in it that people can look at. And really what I would just say is it's if you do the process correctly, the chemical constituents of our compost are indistinguishable from the chemical constituents of a compost that would have been made like without human waste. Because essentially it boils down to the same molecules. Does that answer your question?
Hey Liz, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about funding for cities. Like how is the composting facility funded for you guys? I'm working with the city of Westminster and we're just trying to figure out like staffing and funding opportunities and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so first of all, it is what we have might be a little different than what Westminster might have because we are co-located with a landfill. So it does make the financial aspect a little more murky just because the landfill enterprise fund umbrella is everything that we do is within that, and that's composting and recycling and everything all together. So we're an enterprise fund, so fully funded by the fees we charge at the scale. And so, but that goes for the landfill, the trash, and the compost as well. So we do charge tipping fees at our entry point. So we charge for food waste, we only charge $12 a ton. And again, I did put our website in the chat, so anyone who wants to can go look on there and look at all of our tipping fees. But we charge $40 a ton for brush. We charge for leaves, we charge for everything based on what it actually costs us to process it. So I would say I think that's really key is charging what it actually costs you to process a material. So you're not gonna be able to have a composting site that's free to use unless you're gonna fund it with tax dollars. I mean, that's kind of the choice that a municipality has to make. So ours is not funded by tax dollars at all. It's funded only by the fees. And so that's why we kind of split the cost to process it between the front end and the back end. So we have a fee to drop off and a fee to buy compost. And those together do pay for the program. However, I will say we've also benefited significantly in the past from RREO grants, which would now be the C3 program. So I would not hesitate to go hard on applying for a C3 grant for your expensive pieces of equipment. We got our massive industrial shredder paid for completely by the RREO program, which was a huge help for us.
Okay,
So,
thank
yeah.
you.
Uh-huh.
One thing I'll throw out there just to add into the product conversation, and I do think it's very important for you to treat what you're making as a product, both from a regulatory perspective. If you're not managing the materials that you're producing at the back end of your compost facility like a product, we're going to be looking at you a little closer about are you actually a compost facility or are you just an alternative to waste disposal? But I also think it's a big part of promoting what your brand is. And whether you do that through selling that product or limited giveaways, I wouldn't give away all of it unless you have a restricted amount. Um, but I think that's a crucial component of the business. And I will say that the toolkit doesn't get into marketing and selling your product all that much, but I think there's a lot of resources out there for folks to dig into um, how to how to handle that product like it is a valuable material because it is. And I think, like Liz said, and both Julie said, and I think most folks around the state that have developed compost programs, they are making not just compost as a product. They're doing blends of different materials and selling multiple different streams there that are targeted at different markets. And then one other thing that I'm going to throw out that's going to be way too complex for probably what this talk is, but is kind of targeted at municipal level composting is, and this is a big, huge permitting lift, but if you have your own wastewater treatment facility and the residuals from that wastewater treatment facility are very expensive for you to dispose of, and assuming they're not high in PFAS or other constituents of concern, composting them is a great option and could be a huge cost savings if it is um, if it's keeping it from being landfilled. I know landfilling of biosolids is very expensive. There's often dewatering that needs to happen with that. Whereas compost can actually handle some of the liquids that come with that residual stream, makes a great product. But again, it is a big permitting lift to get that facility off the ground. And I think I saw Megan with Boulder on here. As she well knows, it can also be kind of a fire point for folks in the community, um, typically around the PFAS issue. So I just say, like, if you're thinking about developing a municipal program and wastewater treatment residuals are something that you already manage and you're having difficulty getting rid of them, or land application is no longer an option for you, may consider think about coordinating efforts there to help make the funding for the compost facility make sense.
I was going to say, Clinton, you have anything to add?
Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment on the giveaways, and I really appreciated the way Liz frameworked her giveaways. I just wanted to add a layer to it, which is utilizing the finished product as a giveaway with a partner who's purchasing the finished product to give to residents or to give to business partners or to give back to their partners is another way funding for the finished product, but then also allow them to celebrate the use of the finished compost. So another way to think about it, like a good example for A1 is Whole Foods had been a great partner buying a lot of finished compost to give back to their customers. So just another way to leverage businesses and give them the opportunity to celebrate the use of their organics diversion. That's all I want to say.
Any other questions or thoughts or comments? This is your time to ask. Otherwise, you have to wait a week to get an email response.
I have a question that's kind of to all three, more, I guess, to Jace and Liz. So Jace, you were talking about a compost facility treating their compost as a soil amendment product. But I know there are times, especially at operations such as South Canyon, where due to various reasons, there might be a need to take a compost load and use it as alternative daily cover rather than sell it. Maybe something. So Liz, I'm seeing your face. You rarely do that, is what I'm seeing from that reaction. And then I'm wondering, Jace, is if a facility does that then threaten their permitting as a compost facility if they find a need to use that product not as a soil amendment from time to time?
So I don't know too many places around the state that are doing that. I think overs sometimes can be used as an alternative daily cover. Probably at a landfill where there's a compost facility co-located, and probably only really in the instance where those overs are contaminated. Um, I will say, so anything that you put in the landfill, regardless of whether it's cover or going to some beneficial component of the landfill, it's still landfill and we won't count that as diversion. So know that those numbers, I'm going to have you report separately and they're not going to be counted in with the diversion numbers for the state. So if we're thinking about actually diverting materials from disposal, that's not going to count. It also is going to need to be something that's allowable in the landfill permit, that material can specifically be used as ADC. So usually I would say that you're putting the effort and energy into trying to make compost. And unless that compost pile has completely failed or is just heavily contaminated and you don't have any recourse, I think it's going to be worth your while to probably make it, uh, put it through another process, try to make an actual compost product out of it. Alternatively, if for some reason you can't pass finished compost product testing, or if maybe you don't want to completely finish the compost, there may be alternative soil solutions, soil application solutions, but they're not going to be unrestricted use like what finished compost is. So finished compost is tested to a level where we're like, it's safe. You could basically eat it, right? Like it's safe to use in kind of an unlimited application. That's not its best use, right? But it's safe to use in an unlimited application. Whereas if you did a partially finished compost or something that was high in some certain nutrient, we would probably basically allow you to apply that to soil at an agronomic rate, not dissimilar to how we would do with a beneficial use process for you. Where you would basically say like, hey, here's its intended use. It's going to grow a crop at XYZ. It'll specifically take care of the issues that are within it, and it will be applied in a safe manner. So there are solutions for issues that arise with compost product, but I would say things that are landfill uses for it, unless we're talking about cover systems, I think we would prefer to see them not go to landfill uses.
Can I just speak a minute on that?
Oh, I want to throw in something too, real quick.
Okay, go ahead, Clinton.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think this is really important. Jace, can you please explain to everyone on the call the difference between daily cover and final cover on a landfill? You just alluded to it at the end of what you're talking about, but I think that's really important to understand the difference between daily cover that's going to get buried versus a final cover product that's going to be for a different benefit. Can you explain that, please?
Liz, do you want to take that in what you were also going to say, since you're a landfill operator?
I mean, sure. Essentially it's right, the key is in the words there. So daily cover is every landfill is required to cover their working face, which the working face is where you're burying trash that day. Every landfill is required to cover that at the end of the day, every day. Every landfill has different permits. It's really site specific, but I mean, the default is you cover it with dirt that you've excavated on site. Most landfills have something called ADC permitted, which is alternative daily cover, but your permit has to specifically state which types of alternative daily cover you're allowed to use. That could be things like shredded tires is one of ours. Or it could be shredded mattresses is another one of ours. Shredded furniture. It could be compost overs in some cases, but I will say that's rarer. But it would, that's your daily cover, and I will say, at least for us, and I don't know anyone else who would be different. I mean, landfills are not going to use finished compost, even failed finished compost as daily cover. It's still just too valuable. So we wouldn't be doing that. If a compost pile did fail, like its time and temperature, we would probably recompost it, actually, rather than essentially throw it away. What you're doing with your alternative daily cover, that material is essentially being thrown away because even though you will a good landfill, right, the next morning we'll peel that daily cover back and use it multiple days. You're still losing it over the course of several days, and it is ending up in the trash. It is being thrown away. Now, final cover is different. Final cover is kind of the cap you're putting over an area that you're not going to touch for the next 5, 10 years. But that also is different depending on your permit, and every landfill could be permitted differently depending on the type of final cover you're going to use. For us, we actually don't have any final cover placed. We only have intermediate cover, which is another distinction. But our intermediate cover, which is closer to final cover, is like areas we're not going to touch for the next 5 years. And that's like 18 inches of dirt. And now that's more valuable clean dirt that we're putting because we're not going to touch it for a while. So we're not really wasting that dirt, we don't feel, by placing it there because it's going to stay for a while till we close the landfill. And when we close the landfill, that's when we'll do final cover, which is the cover that won't be touched for 30 years.
Or more.
Hope
Or
that
forever.
hope that is confusing enough for everybody.
Yeah, and I'll just add in final cover can be soil. That soil cover needs to be able to grow. Essentially grasses or native plants that will help stabilize that cover and keep the water from infiltrating into that landfill. And so compost amendment at that time is a positive functional use, and we would count that as diversion.
So somebody did just put in the chat, are Republic Services and WM using compost as ADC? I would be, I mean, call them and ask them, I would say. I would be shocked if they were using it as ADC. They might be using it as intermediate cover. That they're going to try and vegetate.
Yeah, and I'm assuming with dads that Denver has that contract with them, I would imagine the allowable uses for their finished product are not going to be ADC.
Okay. Clinton, any last words?
No, this is amazing. Julie and Liz, you're fantastic, and thank you for such amazing presentations.
And Jace. Thank you.
Jace, well, Jace, that's just known. Jace is just Jace.
I would say thanks to Julie and Liz for providing something functional and entertaining to be presented as opposed to a document.
And keep your guys' eyes out. Our fellow Danny, who's on this call. Danny, if you want to wave, do something. There she is. She is doing some more research and reaching out to folks to help them understand more of what's going on in this toolkit, so that we can increase composting within the state. Did I get that right, Danny? Do you want to say anything? Okay, good. Cool. So just keep an eye out for some updates and things that she's working on. She might touch base with you. She might want to come tour with you or help you out. So if you want a presentation or anything else, she's your girl to go to kind of continue this work. So yeah, thank you guys for joining. I will post this so then you can also share it with people. Everyone's gonna be like, what's going on with organics? Like I keep getting emails about this because we're just going to inundate them, compost the whole state.
Thanks, Allie.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. See ya.
See ya.